Underwriting deals is such a major pain point for people. Most don't want to do it, and the people that are good at it are few and far between. That is why after 6 years of being in the industry and buying over 1,200 apartments, using my best-selling multifamily deal analyzer, I created Real Estate Lab, a full suite acquisition software for multifamily investors. We have built a product that helps investors automate their acquisitions and close more deals, all in a cloud-based platform. You can go to realestatelab.com and sign up today using the promo code TAG2 for 10% off your first 12 months. This is David Tupin. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to The Apartment Gurus, where twice a week, host Tate Siemer brings you deep dive interviews with the wisest gurus in the apartment investing industry. These experts are sure to create game-changing value and inspiration designed to catapult your business to the next level. Be sure to reach out to Tate at www.investwithgreenlight.com for access to his investor portal and Calendly link. And now, here is Tate Siemer and the Apartment Gurus.
Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Apartment Gurus podcast. And I'm really excited about today's guest, Mr. Anthony Vicino. He's a best-selling author, a real estate investor, and a serial entrepreneur committed to helping people maximize their return on life. I love that concept, return on life, right? Like, we're all alive. We might as well make something of it and get high returns. He's the co-founding partner of Invictus Capital, a multifamily acquisitions firm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with $60 million in assets under management that provides busy working professionals with the opportunity to invest better. He's also the host of the Multifamily Investing Made Simple podcast. So listeners, check that out. And he's also the author of Passing Investing Made Simple. And he firmly believes that investing shouldn't be complicated, scary, or overwhelming. So, Anthony, I'm super stoked to have you on for a number of reasons. One is that you guys we're kind of just behind you in terms of assets under management and just ahead of you in terms of doors under management. So our companies are in a similar place in our growth, and it's really fun for me to get a chance to, get our heads together and kind of talk about what's happening in your business and what you're doing right now, and how you're strategizing with the new market and everything else. So but first of all, welcome to the show, Anthony. I'm really glad to have you.
Dude, I'm psyched to be here. And likewise, it's always cool to have conversations with people who are in the industry. They're awesome. They're experts. They know what they're doing. And we can have good, detailed conversations that hopefully bring the listeners some value about, what we're doing, how maybe they can implement it into their systems. And hopefully, the rising tide lifts all boats and we can, collaborate. Yeah. And as a result, maybe all do better.
Yeah, totally. So, before we really dive in, would you kind of just share a little more color on your story and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. So who is this guy? And it's always funny because the bios are like the highlight reel. Kind of sound, like the goal is to make you sound like a superhero and be like, oh, he's so cool. He's done all these things. But to really understand my story, I think it's helpful to go back and understand, for me, I have really severe ADHD, and growing up, that was really, really problematic. To the point that when I was coming out of college, I really didn't know what I was going to be doing with my life because I was chronically unemployable. I was getting fired from literally every job. And it was hard because even at that point in my life, I knew I had a lot of potential. And I think a lot of people feel like they have greatness inside, but they just can't figure out how to tap into it. And so there's all these different directions you could go, but actually getting your wheels on the ground and going through and making meaningful forward progress, it was really difficult for me. And so coming out of college, I went and spent the better part of a decade traveling the world as a professional rock climber, which sounds really cool, but it really just meant that I wasn't making a ton of money. I got to sit in the dirt a lot. I got to drive around in a van and climb rocks, and that was cool. Yeah. That's what I wanted to do, but it wasn't a life that had a lot of meaning or impact or purpose behind it.
Sure.
And it came to a head where, I tried to marry this woman. I went to her parents and I was like, hey, can I marry your daughter? And they looked me like dead in the eye. And they're like, what are you going to do to provide for our daughter?
Wow.
And
that's a slap in the face, huh?
Yeah, that's not how I saw that conversation going. But it was a wake up call that I had been playing Peter Pan for a long time and that I really needed to get things figured out.
Yeah.
And so I started getting things figured out, but that relationship ended up ending about a year later. And I found myself suddenly living back in that van, but now I was homeless. I didn't really have a choice. I was like the only place I could afford because I was $80,000 in debt. And I was sad because, this person I love left me and didn't really have like this direction in life. And that was when like rock bottom, a buddy came to me and he's like, dude, we got to get you out of here. Let's build a business. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever thought about that concept of entrepreneurship. I was not the kid who would pluck flowers and sell it to the neighbor. I didn't have a lemonade stand. I wasn't that guy. But when you're at rock bottom, you have nothing to lose. So I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's try. And so we built a window washing company and that was actually really successful. And I was like, this is awesome.
Nice.
And I started to feel like I had purpose, whereas like, working for myself, building systems, delivering value to the world. Like this is what I was meant to do. And so for the last 12, 13 years, that's what I've been doing is building businesses of one type or another. And real estate's just another manifestation of that, which I started in 2012, really passively by accident. Actually, a buddy, when I was building that window washing company, I was doing like pretty well. And he comes to me and he says, hey, do you want to invest in real estate with me? I'm buying these quads. And I was like, I don't know anything about real estate. So I'll give you money, you go buy them, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want anything to do with that. And so he did that. We still own them today and they've done really well. But it wasn't until maybe 2016, 2017, where I started looking at the buildings around us, like as you're driving around downtown and you're like, who actually owns these things? Mm-hmm. And like that started to like, spiral into this obsession with understanding like, how did people come about like building skyscrapers and owning skyscrapers? Like that just was like mind boggling to me. And sure, there's like really wealthy people that own them. And sure, there's really wealthy, organizations and institutions that own them. But a lot of the buildings that I was seeing, I was like, oh, these are owned by just regular Joes and Janes, so just like me, like not too different. And that was really interesting. So I started scaling with the intention of building a vertically integrated multifamily acquisition firm in about 2016, 2017. And started with a triplex, then went to a 6 and then a 30, and then just kept scaling from there. And at the moment, we're in the middle of some acquisitions that will push the numbers. So it's hard to calculate it, but sitting around $60-70 million of assets under management. And that's cool. But what's really fun about that is in 2019, we started bringing passive investors into our deals. So like our friends and our family, and then people that we didn't have relationships with, just, random investors that had seen our content and they started investing alongside of us, which was really awesome. Up to that point, we had just been using our own money, doing joint ventures, and that's great. But it's been this whole new world now of syndicating. We've been doing that for the last 3 years or so.
That's cool, man. That's a great story. It's, we get a lot of great guests on the show, and we always really dive into their story and, kind of how they got to the multifamily space. It sounds like you started small. You actually started in residential with a triplex. Mm-hmm. Did you have a kind of an aha moment around scaling up into larger scale buildings, or was it just kind of like putting one foot in front of the other?
Well, it's interesting. Like I always knew where I wanted to go in those early days. It's like, I want to be in larger commercial multifamily, but you also have to be realistic about where you are. And I knew what type of company that we wanted to build was with in-house vertical integration. So we wanted to have property management capacity. And I wanted to learn that, but I wanted to do it in a low stakes environment. And that's what the triplex was for me. So I bought that with a FHA loan. I put $7,500 down into it, lived in one of the units, and learned by getting my hands into the machine, like how do you run a little business? And after a year of that, I was like, okay, I understand this well enough because I've been doing it now that I'm ready to start scaling. I understand if I was to hire a manager or a leasing agent or repair and maintenance staff, I understand what would be required of them. So I can accurately, give them a job description and hold them accountable. Whereas a lot of times when you try to start scaling and hiring for things, if you've never done the job before, it can be very hard to know, like, okay, is this person actually great at what they do? Is it very clear about what I expect them to do?
Yeah.
And so the triplex was that kind of proving grounds, but it was really interesting because the triplex ended up appreciating $125,000 in the first 9 months, which made me look like a genius. I was like, oh, I'm the best investor in the world. Look at me. But like, if you really stop to think about what was causing that, like that really drew the big issue with small residential for me, which was those sales are based off of comparables. Like the value is just based off of what did the neighbors sell his house for.
Yeah.
And if the neighbor got laid off last month and he had to sell at a loss, or he got divorced and he had to sell it, quickly, then that would negatively affect my building. Whereas if he, got it at the top of the market, that's going to help my building. I didn't like that lack of control. And the whole purpose of having in-house management was I want to be able to control the business, the expenses and the revenue as much as possible by delivering exceptional value to our residents. And so I didn't like the idea of not even having any control over the value of my building. So that's what really prompted then, okay, we need to start going larger, quicker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So, I've had this discussion actually, ironically, in the last podcast episode I just recorded earlier today, we had this exact same conversation about the difference between residential and commercial as far as the valuation process, and why the residential space is so much more speculated and really therefore risky, because your after repair value is 100% based on somebody's opinion, essentially an appraiser. And there's a lot of, that's a wild card, right? Like when we were flipping single family houses, I remember like we'd get it under contract and it was like, okay, the next step is, will it appraise? And, we got stung a couple times on that, and it's painful. So, like you're so right in that the commercial space, the valuation's based 100% on income, and of course the market cap rate in the market. But, that the fact that it's based on income, and the fact that you have, in most cases, historical financials and rent rolls and everything else that shows you the performance of the asset, makes it so much less risky, because you can count on those numbers determining your value. And that's key when you're underwriting a deal. You're bringing other people's money into it. Like you got to kind of nail that underwriting, and at least as closely as you can. And so not being able to have a non-speculative after repair value, so to speak, is a huge plus in the multifamily space. And you saw it early. Like you're like, I'm in this triplex and it might not appraise for what I need it to appraise for. And that's not a position I want to put my company in. And so you saw the magic of scaling up, and that's exciting. And so, and congratulations, man. Like doing that step up growth pattern is challenging. There's no doubt about it. Like it's all challenging, right? Like, but you made it happen, and here you are today. What are your current deals look like? Like how big, what do they cost? How many units? All that stuff.
Yeah, and actually, real quickly on the triplex, I want to circle to this because it proves the point of like how fragile the comparable system really is. So it appraised. I did a refinance. It appraised for $125,000. So I bought it for $246, and it appraised for $375. Took out a HELOC and then used that to go buy the next building.
Okay.
But when I went to sell the building about a year after doing that refinance, it only sold for $320.
Got it.
So you think about that, and it's like, wait, they appraised at $375, but in the actual marketplace, somebody was only willing to pay $320 for it.
Yeah.
Right. And so even in that dichotomy, it's like, okay, there's a wild fluctuation when it comes to like singular opinions. So these days, what we focus on is, a lot of people will focus on 100, 200 unit complexes. And we think that a lot of people kind of sleep on that 20 to 60 unit middle ground.
Yeah.
Where you get these mom and pop owners who have owned them for 20, 30 plus years, and they don't have like institutional quality operations generally. Right. So there's a lot of people go in there and improve them. The big reason why people typically shy away from them is, one, when you're really small and you're buying like duplexes, triplexes, the idea of then jumping to 20, 30, 40 units seems very, very large and scary. So they can't really, a lot of people struggle to make that jump conceptually. And then practically it's difficult. But then on the other side, institutional investors, the big players that are looking at 150, 200 units, they're not really wasting their time with the smaller things because they can't get the scales of efficiency. Right. So like when you only have a 20 unit building here and 20 unit there, like you can't justify on-site property management. We've kind of solved for this by only investing in our backyard and having vertical integration. So what we do is we actually group our assets by neighborhood. So, we might buy a 20 unit and then the building right next to it is another 20 unit. And then the building right next to it is a 15 unit. So we buy up the whole block and now suddenly we have 85 or 100 units. And it's a lot more efficient now for our team to go and service them because it's almost as though it's one large apartment complex. So that's kind of the niche that we've started to find a lot of opportunity personally.
I think that's brilliant. And, again, this is something that's come up on the show before, that there's kind of this space of opportunity, like you said, in that 20 to, let's say, 50, 60 unit asset class for all the reasons you just said. Like the typical owner of those properties, well, it depends, but a lot of times it's a mom and pop owner. They don't keep up with market rents. So there's an operational opportunity there to go in and stabilize the property at market rents and create value that way. And at the end of the day, if you're doing, let's say you create, $1 million in equity by doing that on a 40 unit, you do that, 5 times, that's 200 units that you just created, hopefully $5 million worth of equity in. And my buddy David Tupin, he's been on the show a few times. He was always early on all about the bigger the better, and so were we. And I got to say, we kind of still are. The deals we go after are typically 100 plus units, but his whole point was he shifted into like, if I can make $500,000 on a 30 unit, like, why wouldn't I do that? Like, I know how to do it. And, at the end of the day, it's all about your balance sheet and your P&L statement, everything else. Like if you're hitting singles and you hit enough of them, you're going to score runs, and you don't need to swing for the fences every time. So I really like that. I really like your strategy there. Are you guys doing direct to seller marketing to get those properties?
Sort of. And real quick, just to circle onto what you just said there, because I think it's really an important one, which is like a lot of people are too proud to bend over and pick up $1 because they're like, oh, like I only make $500,000 on this deal. It's like, okay, well, I mean, is it a sure thing? Is it a great deal? Do it. Like, why not?
Yeah. Right.
And as you start doing those really, really big deals, especially if you're new and starting out, you're going to get diluted quite a bit because you probably got to bring on a bunch of partners. Right. And so like if you can do a 30 unit with just you and like 2 other partners, there's proportionally just as much profit to be had, a lot less operational complexity too. So I like that a lot. But in terms of deal flow, because we're local, we know everybody in terms of the brokers. We know a lot of the sellers, and it's the case in most markets where most markets follow that 80-20 rule where, 80% of the inventory is going to kind of collect itself into the hands of 20% of the people. Yep. And if you know those 20% of people, then you never suffer for deal flow. Yep. And so for instance, like this portfolio right now, we're acquiring, this year we've acquired 12 buildings from the same seller, old guy who's getting out of the game. Last year, we bought 4 buildings from him. He came to us in the winter and he's like, hey guys, I want to get out of the game. I want to sell you my everything. We're like, cool. Right. And so that was just from having a really good relationship with a seller who knew that we were reliable, that we do what we say, we don't back out, we don't retrade it in the 11th hour. For him, he wanted to 1031 into triple net lease office and retail. So for him, timing is really important, not necessarily getting top dollar. Whereas for us, we're like, cool, we have investors. We need to make sure that they're getting a good return. So we need to buy this at a good basis. So we're able to reach this ground where he gets what he wants, which is surety of close on time. And what we want is good returns for our investors. And it just happens to be like, these are fantastic assets. So it's like a win-win-win all around for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So it sounds like you're more in the broker game than the direct to seller game. would you say?
Yeah. And I would say in the early days, all of our deals came as a result of broker relationships, but not like the big Marcus and Millichap, CBRE, those relationships, more like a couple of small guys and gals here in town that were like kind of flying under the radar, did more pocket listings.
Yeah.
And from that, two strategies that were really important for our growth, which like we haven't really done a deal with a broker in a long time at this point.
Okay.
We've just done based off of relationships with sellers, where when we would buy something in the past with a broker, we made sure to become very friendly and maintain the relationship with the seller, because a seller selling one building through a broker probably has another building in their portfolio at some point they want to sell, and they don't want to deal with a broker. Like if they have a good relationship with you and you can be friends, they're just going to give you a call and they're going to do the deal with you off market. So that's been huge. The other thing is when in the early days, when we were doing tours of properties with brokers, a lot of times they would do group tours and they would bring other groups to look at the building at the same time, just for the sake of, efficiency. And a lot of people will go into those tours and look at the other potential buyers as competition. And everybody will kind of like, they'll say hi and they'll be friendly, but they'll kind of just like, take their notes over here and they'll all be kind of whispering to each other like, oh, did you see that? Don't let those guys know. Otherwise they might use that information. We took a different tact and we're like, forget this building, like forget this seller. This is a pool of like 5 other potential sellers in the future. Right. Because these guys are buying. That also means they probably have other assets. And at some point, a buyer becomes a seller. And so if we can have relationships with these guys in the future, when they want to sell, they'll maybe want to sell it to us. And so that was our approach from the beginning, is like going in when we see these group tours, like, let's be friends with these people. Let's make a meaningful relationship. And so that's really been key to our deal flow.
That's so smart. Yeah. Just networking with owners, like not even going after their properties and calling them about their properties, but just networking with them. And you say you're doing this all in your backyard in Minneapolis?
Yep. Minneapolis, St. Paul, first string suburbs up here in the great Minnesota.
What's that market like? I really, you don't hear people mention it a lot. Is it a growth market? Is it a cash flow market? What's it like?
It's a mix. I would say it's Midwest markets are great because you can still get a good mix of cash flow and appreciation.
Right.
I think a lot of people sleep on the Twin Cities. We had a pretty rough 2020 with all the civil unrest that happened with George Floyd and the riots, and that like turned off a lot of people and made it very difficult. And then last year, St. Paul put into effect rent control. And so like there's these variables that make this market a lot more difficult for, I would say, people wanting to invest from out of state coming into it. Mm-hmm. And for us, it's like this is our unique edge. This is our backyard. We know how to operate within its parameters. But like when you look at it from a macro market perspective, we love it because it has so many strong factors going for it, including more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any other city in the country. We have like the 3rd largest university in the University of Minnesota. We have the #1 healthcare system with the Mayo just down in Rochester, which also then extends up here into the Twin Cities. We're constantly ranked #1 for like quality of life and fitness, which is just generally surprising for people that are like, wait, people are healthy in Minnesota. Like you guys spend half your year in the, sheltered away from the snow. But it's those factors, but probably the most important one is just how stable it is. So when you backtrack the math and you look at like 2007 or even like further back into like 1980s, 1990s and say over a 50-year time frame, how has this city performed? And it's just steady Eddie. Every single year you see like 4 or 5% year. You just set a timer to it. And we love that personally. Rather, there's great growth markets like Phoenix and Austin. You see 20% rent growth, but I like knowing that it's next year is probably going to be like the last 15 or 20. And the year after that's probably going to be the same. Like it's just being able to set a clock to it.
Yeah. It makes underwriting a lot easier.
100%. Yeah. And we're not the sexiest market. We're not going to have the craziest returns, but at the end of the day for us, our #1 investment thesis is if you take care of the downside, the upside takes care of itself. Yep. And we don't need to hit grand slams. If we're always hitting doubles and triples, like you're unstoppable. You're going to do very well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It sounds like a good opportunity for you, given the challenges that out of state buyers face and understanding the nuances of the market. That's an opportunity creator for working in your own backyard, which is ideally where you want to be. Managing out of state is challenging. And we know that because that's what we do. And we're in Salt Lake City, which is a heavy growth market, and is not a cash flow market at all. So that's why we go elsewhere. If we could do it in our own backyard, we absolutely would. I mean, there's nothing better than having hands-on access to your assets and decision making about CapEx and all that stuff is a lot easier. And it sounds like you have your own property management company managing these. To actually talk about that for a sec. So what was your thinking behind doing that as opposed to going third party?
Yeah. On the point of if you could do it in your backyard, you would. Like, what I find so cool about real estate is that there is no one strategy to win the game.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
There are so many good strategies. The key is to pick one and get really good at it.
Yeah.
If you master your strategy, you're going to do well. And so that's one of the cool things about it. But in terms of the property management for us, in my other businesses, I had noticed that we had built our company, specifically a manufacturing company, under the guise that whoever's closest to the end consumer wins. Okay. And so what we did is we tried to cut out as many middlemen in the equation as possible. So when we were, say, importing hardware from China or Singapore, we'd go directly to the factories and we would cut out the logistics and the freight in the middle, and we would own that ourselves. Or when it came to actually producing the polyurethane, we would formulate that in-house with our own reactors.
Wow,
and
interesting.
As a result, what it allowed us to do is it controlled our costs a whole lot more, but it also controlled the end user experience. Okay. And this all came to a head really in 2020 when suddenly there was a whole lot of supply chain issues for everybody in the world except for us. And so we really thrived in that business during that period of time. And so that thesis has served us really well in the past. And so coming into real estate, it was always obvious, at least to me, that at the end of the day, if you take care of the resident, they take care of the building, and that takes care of the investment. And so the consumer, the customer that you really have to solve for and serve is the resident. And I don't think people really give that enough attention, and they don't give it, they acknowledge it, but they don't really then act on it. And when you have third-party management, there's nothing wrong with third party. It's, again, different strategies, understand your personality, your strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. For us, we just realized in this asset class of 20 to 60 units, it's very hard to get a great third-party property management company who's going to care for your residents in the way that you would. Right. And so we tried it actually initially for the first 3 months on our first asset when we formed Invictus and started going that route, when we realized this is not going to be a good fit. We need to build this ourselves. As a result, it's been great because by having in-house management, we don't manage for any other companies for the same reasons that we don't outsource, is that we wouldn't care about their property as much as they would. Right now, suddenly we're having multiple customers. We have the residents, we have the investors, and now we have this third-party owner that wants us to do a thing, right? So we only manage our own assets. And as a result, we can run this operation at break even. We don't need to derive a profit from our property management company, which allows us to run a thinner expense ratio, keep more money in the building. So it's more profitable on a property level, which we can then realize.
Hence more valuable and everything. More, you can refinance it better, everything else. That's so smart.
Yep. Because for every $1 you keep in the building, on a 5 cap, that's $20 downstream valuation. So if we can just if we can run this thing at, say, 3 or 4% property management expense, whereas others are maybe running it at 7 or 8, that's a 4% delta that goes directly to our bottom line. And, that's really hard to compete with, especially when we're local and we have, the connections. And so overall, we're able to be a lot more competitive on deals than other operators would be.
Yeah. Got it. You're giving yourself a competitive edge there in a few different ways. And from, working in your backyard where you have home field advantage essentially. And then, having your team that you have control over managing your properties. And it's not only the value that it creates in the building, but it's the value that it creates for the residents and your ability to directly influence and almost care for the residents with that in place is greatly enhanced. So it seems super smart to me.
The downside though is, people always ask, what's the hardest part about running a business or whatever? And the answer is always people. People are the hardest part, whether you're talking about customers, you're talking about vendors, employees. People are complicated, and what motivates one person is different than another, and everybody has different hopes, wishes, and dreams for their life. And so when you're building out in-house management, you have to solve now for your employees, and you have to solve for your vendors, and you have to solve for your residents in a way that if you were outsourcing it, you still have to deal with, but maybe not to quite the degree that you would when you're building it out and you're surrounded with a team of a dozen, people looking to you and saying like, what are we doing here?
Right. Another thing I think is smart about what you've done is, like you said before, to your point, when you have a 20 unit or a 40 unit, it's tough to find a PM for that, because you can't put a full-time leasing agent or full-time maintenance person on that property. It's not smart leverage, and it costs too much. But, with your own company, game on, right? Like, you have the ability to manage whatever you want and leverage people across different properties to manage the properties. So typically, especially for beginners, I'm all about, you absolutely have to do third party. You don't have the expertise level. You don't have the market knowledge level. You don't have all that stuff. Like, they're going to do this job better than you for 3.5% or 4%, or sometimes it's 7 or 8 or 9%, depending on how big the smaller it is, the more it costs, it seems like. But dude, that's tremendous. And
to that point of outsourcing it when you're new, like, use that period. Like, I'm not poo-pooing third party. Use that period as like your tuition or your learning. Like, observe, how do they have their systems of process? Get really involved in your calls with them and understand like, what are they doing? How is it operating? Because if you want to build it yourself and you've never done it before, to your point, like, this is the big leagues. Yeah. Right. Like, the consequences are much higher and you can make a lot of mistakes. And so use that period if you're going to use a third-party manager, and be really paying attention to what are they doing, so that when you take it in-house, you know exactly, or have a good sense for what needs to be there. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning about like being hands-on in that triplex. It was all about understanding, what are the roles and accountabilities that I'm going to need to hire for? What are they going to be doing? And I understood that because I was doing it on a small scale, and I could see, okay, I'm going to need this and this and this.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you about your capital raising game. You mentioned in the registration form for the podcast you filled out that's one of your superpowers, is raising capital. Mm-hmm. What is that? Just something that when you say it's a superpower, does it kind of just come naturally to you? What makes that powerful part of what you do?
No, it's definitely not natural. So to preface that, I guess, in the last 2-3 years, we've raised about $25 million of investment capital.
Nice.
Which, so that's the punchline. Now let's go back to the beginning of the joke, which was on our first capital raise, I struggled to raise $50,000 personally. I sucked at it. I was like, this is horrible. And it's because in the beginning, when you first go to do your first capital raise, it's the difference between being a hunter and being a farmer. In the beginning, you have no choice but to be a hunter. You have to go and you have to talk to your friends, your families, the first ring relationships. You have to have awkward conversations where you're not just trying to sell them the deal, but you're trying to sell them the vehicle of like multifamily syndication, because most of your friends and family have no clue what that is. And you also have to sell yourself as, they have an identity locked in for who you are already. And now you're coming to them asking them for money, and they're like, that's not you. Like, what are you talking about? You're not a real estate person. And so you have to overcome all of those things in the beginning, which makes it very, very hard. Yeah. And so for us, it was about, okay, let's transition from being a hunter to being a farmer. So on that first deal, I struggled to raise $50,000. 11 months later, after building the systems to farm the equity, we did our second capital raise and raised $1.5 million in like a week. Nice. So it was like different, right? And the way that you build the farm is around overcoming obscurity and like the track record. Yeah. Like the fact that you actually know what you're doing. And so we built this system. It was all based around putting out educational content. We wrote a book, Passive Investing Made Simple. We put out a podcast, Multifamily Investing. We've been doing this for like 3 years now. And these things start to compound as you like put the seeds out there, to the point that just, a month ago, we did a capital raise where we raised $4 million in under 48 hours. And so that was the big thing, was like, how do we systematize raising capital and putting out content so that people, they want to come and work with us, so that we're not the ones going out there and hunting them. Because if I relied on my hunting skills to eat, I would be dead. I would not be here still.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want to, right? You want to have it systematized and have it be a farming process that, has steps and everything else to it. So talk a little bit about, your farm, so to speak. Like, are your books, your primary, like, click magnets, so to speak, or what do you have in place for that? And then, how is that all built out and how do you use it for marketing?
Yeah. So the book came out, let's see, it launched actually last August. And what was surprising about it is, so in a past life, I completely glossed over this part of the story, is that after I went to my fiance's parents and asked them if I could marry him, and they said, "What are you going to do?" I decided I was going to become a science fiction author. Because I was like, Stephen King makes a lot of money. So I wrote, in the span of over the last decade, I've written about 12 science fiction fantasy novels.
Wow.
And they've done really well. But I mean, unless you're Stephen King, you're probably not doing great. But it was doing well. And so I have a background as a writer. And so I wrote the book, but we were surprised that it went to number 1 on Amazon, and it stayed there for like 4 months in its category of commercial real estate. And it's been there for the last year in the top 10. And so that's been huge for us, where originally we wrote the book because we're having a lot of conversations with friends and family and trying to explain what this thing was. Yeah. And we wanted to have a way to be able to say, here, go read this. It's through the lens of what you as a passive investor need to know about passive investing, not through the lens of what it takes to be an operator. Because that's what most of the content out there in the real estate space is geared towards, is like, how do you go buy your first building? And most passive investors don't care about that, but they want to know what they need to know. So we wrote that book. I was really surprised it did so well. It's been fantastic. That, in conjunction with our podcast, Multifamily Investing Made Simple, which is really funny. For when we launched it in the first year, it grew so slowly. But that was okay, because when we started, my partner and Dan and I, we sat down and said, okay, we're not going to look at the download stats until year 2. Until we hit 100 episodes, we're not going to pay attention to that. Yeah. We passed our 2-year anniversary, it would have been about 4 months ago. And it's a good thing we didn't look in that first year, because they were abysmal. But in the second year, things started really taking off, and we didn't realize that we had been sitting in like top 10 on Apple for multifamily real estate. And so that was starting to bring just a ton of traction as well. And again, like our whole shtick is leading with education. Like, we really hate the idea of selling ourselves and having to convince people to come work with us. So we're like, okay, let's just put out as much useful, valuable, entertaining content as possible. And if people resonate with our message, awesome. They'll come to us and we'll work together. And if they don't, that's cool. Then they'll stay away, and that's a good thing, because you only want to work with people that you can serve to the best of your ability. And so it's kind of like the self-selecting process for our investors, where these days investors come into our pipeline, they've read the book or they listen to the podcast, and they're ready to go. They're like, I'm ready to invest with you. I know your story. I know you guys. I've listened to you over the last couple of years. Here's my money. And that's a great thing. Whereas in the beginning, it was like pulling teeth. That the first capital raise still gives me chills to think back on. Yeah,
I can relate. Yeah. I mean, when you have the tools in place, the network in place, the value add in place with the book, and everything's working, it feels great. Like that's got to just be a fantastic feeling. And conversely, when you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants and kind of ready, fire, aim approach, like, quite frankly, a number of our deals have been like that. And we haven't been sure exactly how we were going to get them closed. And we always found a way, but we've always been a deal first company, and for better, for worse. And there is some significant downside to that. But the mentor that I signed up with and learned the business from was that way. And everybody says you should be raising capital first or at the same time as finding deals. But, it's kind of, for me, I'm just a deal junkie, and I like, it's easier for me to raise capital with a live deal in hand. At least that's the story in my head about it. And so that's how we've done it, but it creates a pressure cooker for sure. When you have a deadline coming up to close and you don't have all the cash in place to do it. It's not a good feeling at all. So
urgency is a great motivator, right? Like they say, necessity is the mother of all invention. And it's true. Like if you put your feet to the coals and say, we got to get this deal done, like you'll find a way to get it done.
Yeah.
But it's also stressful. And so I totally get it. Like some people I think just work, but it's like the procrastination thing where it's like, I don't really want to raise capital until I have to raise the capital.
Yeah.
And then you'll kind of like rise to the occasion.
Right.
And some people are like, I'll just go in that mode. For us, I just knew based off that first one, I was like, well, that doesn't work. That didn't work for us. At least it didn't work for me.
Yeah.
So I had to go a different route.
Yeah. That's so smart. That's awesome. Okay. So, where are you guys headed? I know you want to get to 1 billion assets under management. I think that's an awesome goal. What else is in your future? Like, future deals and in your trajectory and whatnot.
Yeah, I think, it's always about throwing out numbers that are motivating and like, oh, how would we get to that? Like things that challenge you to think outside your status quo. Like that's just who we are as a company is like, we want to, it's not about being the best, it's about being better, and better never has a finish line, right? So like, how do I get to like further along than we are now? And one of the things that we find really motivating is like, first is to understand, like we are a real estate operations company that also raises capital. We're not a capital raising company that operates, right? Like it's a distinction for us where it's like, it's all about operating. And so on the one hand, we want to be able to serve, 10,000 residents. That's one goal is like, how do we serve 10,000 families? That would be fantastic. That'd be super cool. And then we think about our investors because they're another one of our pools of customers, right? People that we're serving. And we think about what would it look like if we could like return $500 million of invested capital, right? Like just throwing out big numbers. And these aren't that's not necessarily the goal, but we have goals around that where it's like, how cool would it be to be able to return this much capital or to be able to say we've never lost a dime of our investors' capital? Like at the core, when it comes to our investors, that's number one is like Warren Buffett's rule, don't lose money. Rule number two, lose money. And it's like, that would be the dream is if we can build this company in a way where we never lose investor capital, we make them fantastic profits. And in the process, we do an incredible job serving our residents and our neighborhoods. So like, that's the dream. And to get there, it's going to be dependent on having great people and great processes. Like that's the only way. We want to build a company that's not about me or my partner, Dan. It's about the company, about the people, the culture around it. And so if Dan or I get hit by a bus, the team will mourn us, but they will come back to work the next day and they'll pick it up and nobody will be like, oh, the company is suffering because they're not here anymore. So we don't want to have like a founder weak company where it's all about us. That's huge for us. So those are just a couple of things that we think about like when it comes to the future.
That's great. Okay. So just to kind of start to bring this full circle, you got started in 2016. So 7 years ago or so, or 6 years ago, I guess. And, so it's still pretty fresh for you taking those first steps and stepping into the commercial space. For listeners that are at that point and looking to do their first deal, they're looking at, do I do duplexes? Do I do single families? Do I go 20 units or and less? Or do I go bigger? What words of wisdom do you have for a person in that situation as far as what they should be working on what they should be putting together at that point in the game? Like what are your thoughts on that?
So it's always important, I think, to start with the end in mind and ask yourself, what's my desired outcome? Like, what are you trying to build towards? And for a lot of people, they get into this game, and so I coach some people every now and then around multifamily operations. And the first question I always ask is, do you want to invest in real estate or do you want to build a real estate investing company? Because these are different things, right? And a lot of people, they enter thinking, oh, I want to invest in real estate. And what they're really doing is they're trying to build a company, not realizing it and how hard that is. And then they come to resent real estate investing as a whole. So getting clear on like, what's your actual goal here? What's the outcome? And depending on where you are in life and what's your goal, you're going to answer that differently. But let's just take this holistically and say, okay, you want to get into real estate and build a business. Then understand that you're going to need three things to varying degrees. And you don't need to bring them all to the table yourself. You can have partners that kind of offset it. You need time or hustle, you need experience, and you need capital.
Yeah.
In the beginning, depending on where you are, you might have a lot of hustle, you'll probably have no experience, and you might not have any capital. So you need to figure out, how do you solve for lack of experience and how do you solve for lack of capital? Well, you could start where you are with a duplex, a house hack that requires very little capital, and it can be an opportunity for you to start to build the experience. Let's say maybe you're somewhere else in life where you have a lot of capital, but you don't have the experience and you don't have the time. Well, then it maybe doesn't make sense for you to go that route of getting your hands dirty and starting really small. Maybe what you want to do is go and find a partner who has the experience and can put in the time. You supply the capital and you start to learn as a result of that.
Yeah.
If you already have the experience, let's say you grew up in a family that had like a property management company and you're like, you know how this works and you have the hustle, like the capital will come. Like that's easy. Like if you have experience and hustle, like you're unstoppable.
Nice. Yeah. That's great stuff. And really well said. It's, this game's all about finding deals and finding dollars and putting them together, but there's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat. And Anthony, you've done a fantastic job at getting in your lane and making it happen. And so I want to congratulate you on all your success and let you know that our company's here, our green light's here. I'm here to help you any way we can. Well, I got a couple last questions for you. So, do you ever have you ever co-GP'd on anybody else's deals where you were raising capital? It sounds like you're really good at it. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, we haven't.
Okay.
And we probably won't, to be honest. Just where we are in our growth trajectory and what we're looking at doing in the type of company. We have worked and brought in some capital raisers on some of our earlier deals and co-GP'd on our deals where we're the lead. But right now we've started to explore, because we have a lot of capital from our investors that need to be placed. We started looking at what would this look like to strategically partner with operators that we know, like, and trust and have a relationship with in some other tertiary markets around the Midwest, because we just really like the Midwest in general. So we started exploring that at the beginning of the year. But then what we started noticing was that this was starting to pull our attention away from what our core focus was. And this is something that we're really big on, is like, let's stay in our lane. Let's do the thing that we're really good at over and over and over and over. It's boring. It's not sexy. And it can get really easy to get tempted into other things. But it's worked for us so far.
Yeah. Yeah. Last question. Do you still rock climb?
I have not rock climbed in over a year at this point. I kind of retired because when you hit the peak of like your abilities and then you start to come down the back end slope of it, you start to like have nostalgic dreams of what you once were, and like your ego struggles as a result. And my ego couldn't take it. So I picked up some different activities. I started playing tennis and started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which was both very humbling and a lot of fun. Very
cool. Did you know Alex Honnold when you were in that space?
Yeah. Yep. I used to hang out with him. So when I lived in California, I climbed in Yosemite and Bishop a lot up in the Sierra Mountains, and would hang out with Alex. And Alex, a cool dude. I think that people don't properly appreciate how incredible his accomplishments are.
Oh man.
And given how, like, he's a very, very, very good rock climber, but he is not the best rock climber in the world. So like the fact, like what he has done with the skills and the abilities that he has is like even more tremendous than like, he's incredible.
Dude, I saw Free Solo in the theater twice. I took my mom and my brother. I just couldn't get over how freaking cool that movie was and how edge of the seat it was. And I love that sport. It's not something I do. I'm a mountain biker and a skier, but I love watching the movies, and there's so many great climbing movies out right now. And it's a different breed, man. You guys are special. The courage you have and the skill you have, it's something else.
It's an awesome sport, honestly. Yeah. And I would say if anybody's listening to this and they're like, oh, I could never do that. Like, 'cause a lot of people are like, oh, I'm afraid of heights, or I'm not an adrenaline junkie. And I'm like, I never thought of myself as an adrenaline junkie per se. It was all about control, like understanding risk and then controlling for it. In the same way that we do with investing, is like mitigate the downside. And then within those parameters, you can explore this very primal activity that like we all just resonate with like the idea of like climbing in trees. Like there's something about being high up in the air that's terrifying, but it's also exhilarating.
Yeah. No doubt. Well, dude, we're up against time here. Anthony, this has been a fantastic conversation. Lots of great value here. If listeners want to reach out to you and learn more about you and what you're doing, what you have to offer, how would they reach you?
Yeah, you can come find us at invictusmultifamily.com. That's everything that we do on the real estate side. And we mentioned the book a few times, Passive Investing Made Simple. And so, you can pick that up on Amazon. It's like $15 or $20 there. You can go grab it at thepassiveinvestingbook.com. But for your listeners, if you guys stayed with us this entire episode, then I want to reward you. I want to say thank you for that. So here's what you got to do. You got a homework assignment, which is you got to go leave a review for this podcast. So go find iTunes or wherever you're listening to this, leave a review for the podcast, and then shoot me an email, Anthony@invictusmultifamily.com, and say, hey, I left a review. Now give me that book. I'll send you a free physical copy of the book.
Wow, guys, that's an offer right there. So look, if you're listening this far, you're motivated, you're in the space, like these free resources that our guests offer and I offer, like, you got to take us up on those. Like they're too valuable not to. And if you get 1, 2, 3 things that are big and important out of it, then, game on. Right. So that's tremendous. Thank you for offering that to the listeners, Anthony. So, dude, this has been, like I said, it's been great. I really appreciate it. If there's ever anything we can do to help you out as a company, we're here for you. And just really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. This was a lot of fun.
You betcha. So, listeners, thanks for listening to another episode of the Apartment Gurus podcast. We appreciate you, love you, want the best for you, and we're here for you. So reach out anytime at investwithgreenlight.com is our website address, and reach out to Anthony. Get that book. Go do it. And Anthony, I appreciate you plugging the ratings and reviews. That's huge for us. So, thanks everybody. And we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.
This has been the Apartment Gurus with Tate Siemer. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. To contact Tate, go to www.investwithgreenlight.com for access to his investor portal and Calendly link. He loves to hear from you and thanks you for being a valued listener. Just a reminder that you are the guru. See you on the next episode of the Apartment Gurus.